All right, now that you're yawning, we're live.
Hey,
It's a good way to start it. So I'm making sure that everything is functional this time as far as recording on my end, and I'm not going to do a 52-minute recording wherein none of my audio comes through.
I can hear you, so we're good.
Yeah. Oh, you can hear me on the stream. Okay,
Yeah, so we're
that's
good to
good.
go. We're talking about spells
Yeah.
and
This
magic.
this week we covered classes last week, and I'm sure we'll be back there because that's a big part of Sundered Ages is that it's a classless system. But this week, yeah, we're doing spells, spellcasters, and casting because it is a big part of D&D. Like the whole, it's knights and wizards and dragons, and two of those are magical, right? And it at least one of those is always casting spells, and the dragon is casting spells unless the DM was too lazy to figure out what spells the dragon should have based on their age, right?
Right.
All right, so I think we had some points that we wanted to touch on that we put down
Mm-hmm.
ahead of time, and again, the format is today on Tuesday we're going to go over what you see or can expect to see in most modern or traditional D20 systems, D&D from sort of second edition onwards to fifth edition now. And then on Thursday or Friday, the follow-up episode will be how Sundered Ages is different and how we address maybe some of the criticisms that we put forward in the first episode.
Oh man, let's start shitting on spells right now, because
Absolutely.
I have some beef. I have some beef with uh
We can agree
just
bards are the worst.
dude. Bards are so dope.
Bards are the
Um,
best.
we can agree that that was a false statement, and bards are awesome.
Yeah,
And anybody who takes the time to roleplay a bard is got to be a wonderful person, because
absolutely.
that's probably some of the most fun and a lot of shenanigans are going to take place when. But we're getting off topic. But yeah, I love bards, and people who play bards are awesome people. Um, but I think one thing that I just really want to bring up, and I want to get right into it, is and this happens not just in Dungeons and Dragons or in any, but just all games that feature a spell system, is the idea of sort of min maxing, or just some spells are better than other spells, right? Like there's inherent fireball is better than thunderstorm or whatever it is. This one utility spell makes no sense because there's another utility spell that's literally just better in the same line. Why do game developers, game makers, why is it that way? Why do we fill up a spell book and have things that are terrible, and things that are just clearly the better choice? So, what do you think?
Okay. Well, I think it's multifaceted.
Of course.
One, I think there's some tropes for what's expected out of spells. Like a wizard is going to be able to throw fire or
Mm-hmm.
lightning. A wizard's going to be able to make themselves invisible or feather fall or even fly. And like these are all very standard wizard things. Maybe even some form of illusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for that reason, those spells or those types of spells are included. But secondly, as someone that like I love D&D and I've been playing since I was 10 when we were playing AD&D, and I still have the old book with the awful art. The female elf looks horrifying. Um, I I get the feeling now that I have made my own list of spells that the original creators that sort of laid out the outline for spells that has been copied by every edition since then came up with like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen good ideas for spells. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna have fireball. Here's how it's balanced. We're gonna have this other spell. Like we're gonna have the lightning spell uh, that's like chain lightning or web lightning or whatever it's called in that iteration. We're gonna have haste and invisibility. We'll have flight and feather fall, and they come up with some more spells. They dig some into what a bard would be expected to have, some things into what a cleric would be expected to have. Druid, the druid obviously has to have a spell that like wraps vines around a person or encases them in a tree. or conjures an elemental. So we could probably on the fly come up with 24 cool sounding, useful spells. But if you look in the books, there's not 24 spells. There's 100+ spells, and so I think what happened is they came up with these cool ideas, and then they sort of assigned those on the power chart of where those spells should be, and then they had to fill in the blanks in the middle, and it really comes off as, at some point they decided a fireball should do 1d6 damage per, every other caster level and max out at 10d6. And then they worked backward and said, okay, well, if you get that at level 5 as a wizard, what should you have at level 1? And instead of just, what should you have at level 1? Okay, what should you have at level 3? Okay, what should you have at level 5? It very much feels like they sort of anchored the spell system around the spells that we're all familiar with now, and then everything else was just sort of filler, so that a person playing a wizard wasn't just there to cast the same dozen spells, despite the fact that most wizards are probably going to cast those spells more than any others.
So do you feel like, so we fill in those blanks, but it's still nobody picks them. So do you think it's just there? Do you think it's wasted space? Do you think there's an easy fix? Obviously, we're going to get into that on Thursday, but I'd say go into what you think. Why do you think they made that decision? I guess more so than anything else.
One, it's sort of the illusion of choice, like when you go to the grocery store and there's 24 cereals to choose from, but half of them are the same thing. Like, you can rebrand Chex into 12 different kinds of cereal that's basically all the same thing, and but it gives people the feeling that, like, oh, I'm choosing, like, I'm making a decision. And I think spells are the same way. I get the feeling that also a really easy fix for a lot of these is that some of the spells overlap and they don't need to. Wherein, if you have a spell that's like, okay, you're going to add 3 to your next jump check, or you're going to add 3 to your next climb check, or, whatever it may be, those all could just be one spell. Like, or at the very least, it should be, I'm going to add X amount to the next, like, physical check that I make. I don't need a separate spell, especially in a system. If you're playing D&D, quote, legit, as a wizard, your DM is tracking, or you're tracking, that you're paying money for every single spell that you write down in your book. So it's unnecessary to have all those extra spells, and it really does just seem like it's there for fluff. It's there for when the character, when the player puts down the character sheet and writes everything down, they look at the list and they go, I'm only level 2, but I have 9 spells, despite the fact that I'm only going to cast 3 of them, and in a few levels, only one of them is still going to remain relevant. Like, I'm going to continue casting Magic Missile until it just doesn't do me any good.
So if you were to, obviously you've created your own system, but I think there's, if I could simplify it for maybe the lay person who has never played D&D, there could maybe, let's say I was Wizards of the Coast, that is, not just a wizard. I am a wizard. You could remove the fluff and have the things that we know people are going to pick, or we can have even more, right? And have a huge illusion of choice. So maybe we strike gold. Maybe there's one thing that we put, it sounds terrible and people end up liking it. Is there such a thing as too many spells? And is it good to just give people the things that they want and slowly add more as people say, maybe we should have this, maybe we should have that? What is the lesser of two evils? And actually, more importantly, is there such a thing as too many spells?
I don't think there's a thing as too many spells, with the caveat that, like, I would never put 1,000 spells in the book. Right?
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a thing as too many spells, because I also think that spells, just like skill checks, should always be a situational thing. And so you don't have to worry about making Fireball good and then pinning all the other like evocation spells around Fireball to figure out how strong they should be. Start with that level 1 spell or whatever the effective level 1 spell is for the campaign or the setting, the system, and build it from there. And the level 1 spell, for me, ideally, should be something that it's useful, and at later levels, you're for a normal D&D system, you're the wizard that now can throw out an 8d6 fireball. Your spells that you started the game with should still serve some purpose, right? And there can be overlap, but the overlap needs to be for those spells, especially for things like damage, a question of efficiency, which I think even makes sense within like the meta of being a spellcaster, that you would figure out ways to channel more mana or spiritual essence or whatever it may be for the class that you're playing, the theme that you're going for. That like, okay, I can exert all of my magical energy for the day or my resting period or whatever it may be into this amazing spell, or I could cast this lesser spell 10 times, and casting that lesser spell 10 times should probably have a greater overall effect cumulatively. But what you're trading is you're getting a more immediate effect for a higher cost. And so, despite the fact that things may overlap, you do have room for multiple spells that fill that same role, because situationally you might go like, okay, yeah, I could cast Fireball, I could cast Chain Lightning, I could cast Wail of the Banshee, whatever it may be. But the situation doesn't call for it. We're in a dungeon, we're 3 fights in, we, on a meta level, we expect that there'll be like 5 fights and then there'll be a boss or something. And you're the caster and you go like, I still have 80% of my mana. Why don't I just use these weaker spells that are going to accomplish the same thing, not as quickly, to save my resources, right? So that you do want spells that overlap on certain things, especially things like damage or healing, that are efficiency questions. So you're having to make calls, and if you make a bad call, right? Maybe if you had cast the spell that was going to cost you a third of the mana you had left, you'd have killed the target with that attack. And because you didn't, your fighter took that unlucky critical hit. He lost a third to half his life, whatever the case may be. Maybe he broke, so maybe he got some bones broken, or he got a nasty bleed effect, or whatever it may be. And so people are playing D&D for some of that random effect and that cause and effect, the sort of responsibility of making decisions that leads to good storytelling and good in the moment experiences that you can look back to. And immediately after the battle, if you had cast that powerful spell, you might wonder as the wizard, like, oh, was it a waste? But the fighter, in-game, out-of-game, is probably high-fiving you, like, oh man, like, that was insane. That guy was coming at me with the axe, and you just cranked out like a shotgun of lightning and just fried him there. And I was really worried that something, bad was going to happen. Whereas if you cast that lesser spell after the fight, he's like, was that really the best that you could do? Like, could you not have stopped one guy this fight so that I wouldn't have to get wrecked every time we get into an encounter?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of the dynamic. So obviously there's always been the what do I cast in what scenario, the utility of the wizard. But I like the idea of dynamic spellcasting. And that's an interesting topic I think we can get to talk about on Thursday, of, pumping out something that's more than what would be the natural, and having that level of strategy on top of it for people who want that level of play. I'm really excited to talk about that on Thursday. I think that moves us to a big part that I was talking about on the other stream last Thursday. So this has been always a big thing: spells per day. How do you make it balanced. How spells per day, spells per class, spells per level. How do you make it so it's not too many and it's not too little and people don't complain? They feel strong, but they're not too strong because then it's OP. Where does it come into play? I think we should start with limiting certain spells per class before we get to spells per day, because I think that might be cut and dry with a solution at least. So let's talk about restricted spell class per level and spells per class and spells per level. So restricted spells and having to wait to get to them. What are your thoughts on restricted spell classes and advancements over level?
Okay. Well, spells, the way they break down into classes, I'm not immediately opposed to the idea. Like even in Sundered Ages, specializing in positive and negative energy rather than specializing in like evocation, elementalism, that sort of thing, means that you're going to be, raising the dead or frying people alive or healing them, rather than throwing, globs of magma. So I'm all right with that, and so a lot of the traditional, like, oh, these are cleric spells, these are wizard spells, these are druid spells, makes sense. But you always got into this weird overlap where, like, a wizard would get access to a spell at like level 5, but a druid would get access to that spell at level 3, and then a cleric would get access to that spell at level 8 because it was some sort of weird, like, in the middle spell, and maybe a bard, a ranger, and a paladin would all have access to it at, whatever.
And it was the same spell.
And
that's
the
biggest.
It's the same
that's the
spell.
biggest part. It wasn't a stronger spell at the person who got it level 8.
Yeah, it wasn't that, like, okay, the druid and the cleric are both getting this spell. The druid gets access to it at level 5, and it's like the early edition of it, and then the cleric gets access to it at level 8, and they have a stronger version. It's no, at level 8, the cleric is casting this spell, and for them, it's a level 4 spell, and they get X amount of these per day. For the druid, it was a level 2 spell, and they're going to have more of them per day because of the way the spells per day generally work. It doesn't make sense, because there's nowhere in the the meta for the mechanics that says why a druid should necessarily have an easier time doing this if both of them have access to it. If it's a hard cut and dry, these are cleric spells, these are druid spells, and they don't overlap, then you can make the argument like, okay, they might replicate similar things. They might have similar effects. A druid usually has some line of healing spells that are not exactly the same as a cleric, and maybe they don't do as much, or like a quick example, like the Sundered Ages system has druid healing spells that don't work quite the same way that positive negative energy healing spells work. And so it makes sense that, like, they don't have the same values at the same levels because it's hard coded into it that they're not the same thing. But in standard D&D, they're exactly the same thing. I think between classes getting spells at different levels, the whole spells per level, spells known, just makes it feel like you've got a character and you want to do cool things, and then the game is like, no, we're gonna gatekeep you on this. And then, people that are really excited to play like a sorcerer will be told right off the bat, like, don't, because you're gonna know at level 10, you're gonna know 1/8 of the number of spells that you would otherwise know as a wizard, and if you're a caster, it really should be a preparing certain things per day situationally sort of deal. And it feels like it cheapens it. I don't like the current spells per day system, and while it may have been the best thing they had at the time for balance purposes, I think it's always been unbalanced, and I think there's a better system. And that's the one that we use, that's a resource-based system rather than just hard number of these per day.
Yeah, and I think to talk about obviously the classless system, I think just saying that, knowing that the cleric was the only one who got access to the actual good cleric spells. The druid is the only person who got access to the actual real druid spells. But in a classless system, you can play a hybrid cleric druid and not be weaker than the person who the equivalent of multi-classing a cleric and a druid, which is honestly not very great because they have so many unlike stat abilities in traditional D&D. So I think it's interesting that how well not only does the classless system play, and I think that makes sense in most people's head, that you would be able to do that in a classless system. You would be able to, do multiple things much better, especially in a magic-based world or a magic-based system. So I'm excited to talk about that more on Thursday too. Let's go. We were just pretty much ending that point on the spells per day. Let's get into the spells per day because that was always been a hot topic. Again, I played Dungeons and Dragons online. I've played games that have resource systems or just a certain amount, a flat amount. It's hard to juggle. What's too many, right? And even when we're talking about a dynamic, throw all your eggs in one basket, blow your load on all one big spell in a classless system with resource, there needs to be a limit, right? Like there needs to be a thing where we're saying this is too much. Like there's too much here, or this amount of early game spells, because there still has to be restriction, right? You have to have some sort of, maybe not spells per level, but there has to be a way to restrict it, because otherwise people are throwing heavy shit in an early game, and that's no fun. So how do you balance the not making it per level? I think I know the answer to that one, but even more importantly, how do we find the in between? Because everyone has always been sort of upset, and I think mostly it's been there's not enough. There's not enough cast. Like I can't do as much as I want to. People feel reserved. Is at least the idea I've gotten with my experience is you always feel reserved, and because of that, you're not going to do as much as you want. So how do you fix that in a new system?
Okay, well, I mean, we'll get into the specifics of that on the follow-up episode.
Yeah.
How I think we should fix it. But the problem is very similar to the sort of the trope-ish issue that people have when they play RPG games, where you might be level 1, you might be level 90. You pick up like an elixir or a mega elixir or something, and you're one of two kind of people generally. One is you immediately use it because you're low on potions, and you picked it up and you have it to use it, and there it's gone. Or you're like me, and I think a lot of us, and you get to the end of the game having never used it, and you look into your inventory on that final boss fight, and you're like, oh, I have 47 elixirs and all 17 mega elixirs that drop in the game. Because you're never quite sure, like, if you have this powerful thing, when do you use it? And if you use it and then it turns out that maybe it wasn't necessary, it always feels bad. Spells per day is just like that. And like I said, I love casters and casting, and played plenty of paladins and sorcerers and druids, and a ranger once, but I got past that. But spells per day, especially as a primary casting class, feels like how long do I have to wait as a cleric before I'm just hitting people with my mace? Or if you're a wizard, you've got like the crossbow you'll never hit anyone with, right? You try and stand back, and you've got a crossbow, or you've just got like a staff so that you don't suffer the penalty to your AC when some like kobold comes up to whip a dagger at you for being unarmed. and I mean, it never feels good. Like, there's a whole lot of problems that cascade together with spells per day, but, if you use all those powerful spells that you have, uh, in systems it differs a little bit. Like, in some systems, I use my level 7 spells, or level 6, or whatever. I use all the high level spells. You either have to wait till the next day, or you need more commonly in modern systems, you have to have like an extended rest, so like 4 or 5 hours or whatever of rest, and nothing quite breaks the flow in a game than when you're in a dungeon and everyone's excited and you clear a room out and the wizard's like, well, I'm out of spells.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, well, let's camp here. It's a fucking goblin-infested dragon lair in Mount Doom, but the wizard just ran out of spells. I mean, he's still got some level 1 and 2 spells, but let's be real. Like, we're here to fight the Baylor and his dragon guardian, and magic missile's not going to cut it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no, it's because I think the system of spells per day was balanced around the notion of we're going to make these spells, some of them ridiculously powerful, and then just curtail the number of times you can do it per day, rather than we're going to go with the approach that, like, a wizard should be expending, a casting character should be able to expend most of their resources in a single prolonged combat, and then get those resources back fairly quickly. I think it makes sense if your wizard can throw out 70% of what he's capable of in 7 rounds of combat, and then have to sit there for 15 to 30 minutes or whatnot. That is an acceptable break unless you're being actively chased, or like the tower's falling apart, or whatever it is. It's not the same thing as setting up camp and like pitching a tent and deciding who's going to take watch.
Mm-hmm.
Spells per day is that problem. Is you've either got you've got that level 1 spell that's going to be useless at high levels, or you have that one cast of Wail of the Banshee left, and they're just on completely opposite sides of the world as far as the power and efficiency of these spells. And honestly, with a lot of those spells, led to the more recent trend towards like a more conservative approach to how game-breakingly powerful some of these like save first death, basically.
Oh yeah, spells. I don't like how they do it now.
But it's save versus death spells are fine, but I don't think they were ever properly balanced, right?
Yeah.
I'm okay with a powerful wizard frying somebody if they set up the opportunity to do so, right? Like, they've got, the mook, this poor mook walks into the lair stepping on, the metallic floor frame, and the wizard's got the hyped up lightning spell all juiced up and ready to go, and that guy's a pile of cinders, 6 seconds later. And that wizard, blew through a third of his resources to just turn that person into ash. That's fine. That's cool. A person playing a wizard-type character should be able to do things like that when they're a powerful wizard. And he shouldn't then have to go to bed to get that spell back. It's, the only people that have ever... The only system that this has ever made sense in ever that I would defend is the Dragonlance book series had a D20 setting, like with its own variant on D&D mechanics, and in that setting, wizards literally forgot the like pronunciation and necessary hand gestures and whatnot for the spell after casting it, and so they had to go back to their book every day to rememorize such things because casting it like wiped it from their mind. So it makes sense if that's a hard-coded rule for the world, but D&D books don't mention that, right?
Right.
So it's like if you're in Star Wars, the Force works a certain way. If you're in D&D, if the book's not telling you why you have to basically go to bed to get these spells back, then it's not doing a good job. Like, it's poorly balanced. And, you know, while some people may see casting classes as weak early on, situationally at least, I think by the end of the game, most people accept that like that level 19 cleric is gonna like melt the face off any non-casting character in the group. The competition is done. And you can come up with the fighter could get the jump on him, and if he was within 5 feet when the round started, he could get all of his iterative attacks off, and if he hit, all 4 times, he'd kill the cleric outright. And it's like, yeah, what are the chances, right?
Right.
What are the chances the cleric, if the cleric loses that initiative roll, if he's not struck down in 1 round, most times by that point in the game, like, he will put the fighter down in 1 round. He'll lock him down with some sort of paralysis effect. He'll hit him with a save or die, or save or die soft spell, like the spells that do massive damage unless you save and then do minor damage. And it's over because the spells aren't properly balanced with the other skills in the game. And so improperly balanced spells have to be hamstrung by spells per day, and then have to be broken up into spells per class. And it's just a Band-Aid on top of a Band-Aid on top of a Band-Aid.
Yep. Putting lipstick on a pig is what my dad always said.
Yeah.
So we have
Your dad's just full of sayings.
Yeah, he is. So we have about a minute left. I think there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about. What were they called? Cantrips. So cantrips, when I first rolled my very first wizard, I thought they were the coolest thing ever because someone told me I could do them as much as I wanted. And I was like, dang, I'm going to just set fire to things all the time. Turns out it wasn't nearly as fun as I thought it would be because they're horribly underwhelming. Of course, things that you can cast forever and infinity need to be balanced. What's your opinion on cantrips? Are they completely useless? Is there a world where cantrips can be useful for something that you can do forever and ever at any time, at any point? Or do you think they should just be dropped and forgotten and in the wastebasket?
I think cantrips are just, again, they're another Band-Aid. And it's not that cantrips are balanced. Cantrips are boring. Cantrips are boring. Orisons are slightly better. It's the same thing, but for clerics and I think the Prophet class or whatever it was called in Pathfinder. Yeah. But it's just it's an attempt to fix the whole the wizard has to have a crossbow for when he runs out of spells issue with he can infinitely throw a 1d3 frost damage orb 30 feet. Yeah. Okay, well, if that's the case, either one, it's entirely too powerful that he can do this forever, because that means that you should be able to get a couple, no-name level 1 wizards that could just create, like, an ice wall so thick that no one could ever hack that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
If magic works the way that magic works in most D20 fantasy settings, a spell that can be cast infinitely is automatically, like, it's game-breaking. Unless it does nothing, it's game-breaking. Yeah. If you have a spell that's a cantrip that heals 1 point of damage, then you might as well have, that's free to cast, you might as well just have a mechanic where everyone heals to full after 15 minutes of sitting around after battle.
Right.
So the spell is useless. It's useless. It's completely without balance. It's super useful. It's another Band-Aid. It's an attempt. They realize that there's a shortcoming, but there's a fear of adding even more resources and benefits to these casting classes that are generally overpowered to begin with. But they don't want people to be bored. So it's a mechanics versus enjoyment thing. And I don't think they did well for either, because while being able to cast, like Frost Orb an infinite number of times for a creative player really could be game-breakingly powerful. Like the kind of person that takes the item that generates an unlimited amount of water, at a faucet rate. He buys 11 of those, puts them up in the mountains, creates natural streams, and builds a civilization out of it. Out of this, item that costs like 1,000 gold. a wizard with that level of creativity is going to do truly epic things with a spell that does 1d3 ice damage an infinite number of times.
Yep.
But he's also going to feel completely ineffectual in combat if he has to rely on that at any point. So,
Yep.
orisons and cantrips, I think are. I get the idea, like the source of why they want to do it. They don't want people to ever be bored with playing the game, but they just don't make sense. They're either too weak, and they shouldn't be there, or they're way too strong to be something you can cast forever, and again, shouldn't be there.
Boom. That's solid. I'm super excited. Thursday, we're gonna rebalance the mage. We're gonna tear away the band-aids. We're gonna show the wound. We're gonna amputate that arm, and we're gonna put a new one on. So no more band-aids. It's a bionic arm. It doesn't bleed.
It's a bionic arm. This is the cyborg of mages.
Yeah.
It's cybermancy.
I'm super excited to say how the mage is more balanced. How it's fixed. You don't have to worry about any of those problems. And you can do all of the things you ever wanted to do as a beautiful, beautiful mage.
Yeah, and there's a... I don't know how likely it is right now, but I'm trying to get our mage player on when we do that episode.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Because he's been playing in the system for most of, if not a year now, and would have more experience and feedback with how the casting system works and does it feel balanced to him as someone that is primarily a caster. So if he can make it, that'll be awesome. If not, I'll try and at least get some feedback from him, either for myself or for you to read out, just, because I think it'd be useful for people to hear.
Yeah. Excellent. And we kept it into 30-ish minutes.
36 minutes. We're going to stop the recording before it hits 38. That's episode 3, spells, spellcasters, and casting. Talking about, traditional systems, D&D, 2nd edition through 5th edition Pathfinder. And we'll be back on Thursday or Friday with episode 4, where, as Stefan said, we're going to tear all the band-aids off and amputate the arm and put on an awesome new cybermantic arm to make that mage not overpowered, but to feel more useful.
We're going to make it fun.
And more fun than it's ever been before.
It's going to be more fun. That's all you need.
Yeah. All right. Well, then that's it for tonight. I'll see everybody later in the week.
See you guys next time.